The Galactic Empire was said to have had the largest and strongest military force in all of history, which should come as no surprise when looking at the thousands of planets they controlled and the high demand for enlistment. And at the height of the Empire, it is said that they had billions of troopers all across the galaxy. But what happened to the Empire after the Battle of Endor and Palpatine's death? After the Empire lost at the Battle of Endor and Palpatine Invader's death, the remaining Imperial forces would retreat to a safer location, but they would leave all the Imperial troopers on the planet behind. And due to them being stuck with no feasible way off the planet, they would either be forced to surrender or fight. And many of them would surrender. And across the galaxy, news of the Emperor's death at the hands of the rebels would spread like wildfire within the inner and parts of the Middle Rim, which would spark mass celebration and revolts against the Empire. This would cause Imperial leaders to try and cover it up by saying the rebels are liars and that Palpatine was not dead. But of course, very few would believe this and revolts would continue. This would also cause a major increase of rebel support and enlistment, as many people now saw the Empire as weak. And very quickly, many people believed that the Civil War was over and that the rebels won. But the Empire would continue on fighting, saying that the war was not over. But after the death of the Emperor, it would not be the rebels that brought the Empire down to its knees, but rather themselves and their internal fighting for more power. After Palpatine died, there was a major power vacuum that many people tried to fill in, but none would be successful. And this would lead to many Imperial officers leaving and taking control over their established areas in hopes of keeping some of their former power. But due to lack of resources and very low support for the Empire, many of these governments would fall and the New Republic would take their place. But for the Imperials in the Outer Rim, due to a slow retrieval of news, would try to cover up any information about the Empire's death. It would not allow any outside information to go into the Outer Rim, and instead would just remain completely shut off from the rest of the galaxy and try to remain in control for as long as possible. It still insisted that the New Republic was just rebels and terrorists that actually had no power. And for a short while that would work, but eventually news would spread and people would learn about the truth. The slowly decaying Empire would realize that if this kept up, the Empire they worked so hard for would be a mere memory in a short amount of time. So to try and have one final offensive, they would gather up the remaining Imperial forces on Jakku to lure in New Republic forces and destroy them there when they blew up the planet. They would try to do this with the instructions Palpatine had laid out for them when he was still alive, and he came up with a contingency plan for if he ever was to die unexpectedly. They would blow up the planet by releasing a very large collection of Sith artifacts into the planet's core, which would trigger an explosion. So while the vast majority of the Imperials believed that they were making their final stand against the New Republic, it was really just a plan to cause as much damage to the New Republic as possible. But before the plan was fully carried out, the officer in charge would be killed by a fellow Imperial officer, and the very few Imperial forces who remained would retreat into the unknown regions. But because almost all the Imperial forces were now destroyed, this was viewed as the final battle of the Civil War, and the New Republic would finally take control over the galaxy. Following this victory, the New Republic would force Mas Almeida to sign a treaty which ended the conflict within the political systems. It also forced the Empire to stay within the very specific boundaries and limited their military might. But the few remaining Imperial leaders would have a very hard time adjusting to the new galaxy, as internal conflict and sabotage was still very common among them. And after all of this, the New Republic would begin to get rid of their military in hopes of changing things without needing violence. But that would be harder than expected, as many pirates and warlords who flourished under the Empire would fight back against the New Republic. But even though the bulk of the Empire was defeated, there still was some Imperial remnants in the Outer Rim that fought back against the New Republic. But due to their numbers being so low, they were easily squashed by the New Republic. And despite the New Republic putting very strict military limitations on the Empire, some of the Imperial remnant would get their hands on multiple Imperial ships, fighters, and foundries across the galaxy. But while almost all of these Imperial remnants were easily dealt with, there were some that the Republic did not take care of, and that would lead many people to believe that the Republic was weak and wanted a new government to rise, similar to the Empire, which would happen as the First Order from the unknown regions started their conquest across the galaxy. But despite the First Order's large military and clear power, the New Republic did really nothing about it, which would come back to haunt them when the First Order developed Starkiller Base, and the rest, as many people say, is history. It's really shocking to see how one of the strongest militaries in all of galactic history was practically wiped out in a span of a few years. But anyway, that is what happened to the Empire following the death of Palpatine. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Make sure to like and subscribe, as well as comment your favorite Star Wars movie. And with that, my fellow Star Wars nerds, may the Force be with you.